story time now, although it might be more like bedtime story by the time YouTube seems to be sorting itself out. Right, so we started reading Flat Stanley last time, didn't we? Can you remember, because it was a short chapter, how Stanley got flat? What happened to him? Yeah, he was in bed, wasn't he? And that big notice board, bulletin board they called it, didn't they? Fell down and made him flat. Took him to the doctors, but it was okay, wasn't it? So let's find out what happens next. So the next chapter is called Being Flat. When Stanley got used to being flat, he enjoyed it. He could go in and out of rooms, even when the door was closed, just by lying down and sliding through the crack at the bottom. Look at that. Imagine being able to sneak under the crack of the door, my goodness. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop said it was silly, but they were quite proud of him. Arthur got jealous and tried to slide under. Oh no, look. Remember Arthur, his brother? He tried to slide under a door, but he just banged his head. Being flat could also be helpful, Stanley found. He was taking a walk with Mrs. Lambchop one afternoon when her favourite ring fell from her finger. The ring rolled across the pavement and down between the bars of a grating that covered a dark, deep shaft. Mrs. Lambchop began to cry. Oh no, like one of those drains in the side of the road. You couldn't get your fingers through there, could you? Get your whole body in there. I have an idea, Stanley said. He took the laces out of his shoes and an extra pair out of his pocket and tied them all together to make one long lace. Then he tied the end of that to the back of his belt and gave the other end to his mother. Lower me, he said, and I will look for the ring. Thank you, Stanley, Mrs. Lambchop said. She lowered him between the bars and moved him carefully up and down and from side to side so he could search the whole floor of the shaft. 2 policemen came by and stared at Mrs. Lambchop as she stood holding the long lace that ran down through the grating. She pretended not to notice them. What's the matter, lady? The first policeman asked. Is your yo-yo stuck? I'm not playing with a yo-yo, Mrs. Lambchop said. My son is at the other end of this lace, if you must know. Get the net, Harry, said the second policeman. We've caught a cuckoo. Oh no, he thinks the mum's a bit bonkers. Just then, down in the shaft, Stanley shouted, Hooray! And Mrs. Lambchop pulled him up and saw that he had found the ring. Let's have a look at that. Look at that. Look at the police. Look at the faces of the police. How do you think they're feeling? So pretty shocked myself, wouldn't you? Good for you, Stanley, she said. Then she turned angrily to the policeman. A cuckoo indeed, she said. Shame. The policeman apologised. We didn't get it, lady, they said. We've been hasty. We see that now. Look how angry Mummy looks. Oh dear, look. People should think twice before making rude remarks, said Mrs. Lambchop, and then not make them at all. The policeman realised that was a good rule and said they would try to remember it. Dear me, look at that. Oh dear. One day, Stanley got a letter from his friend Thomas Anthony Jeffrey, whose family had moved recently to California. A school holiday was about to begin and Stanley was invited to spend it with the Jeffreys. Wow. Look, there he is. He's got his letter. Oh boy, Stanley said. I would love to go. Mr. Lambchop sighed. A round-trip train or aeroplane ticket to California is very expensive, he said. I shall have to think of some cheaper way. When Mr. Lambchop came home from the office that evening, he brought with him an enormous brown paper envelope. Why would he need one of them? What do you think? Now then, Stanley, he said, try this for size. The envelope fitted Stanley very well. There was even room left over. Mrs. Lambchop discovered, for an egg salad sandwich made with thin bread and a flat case filled with milk. What are they going to do? They had to put a great many stamps on the envelope to pay for both airmail and insurance, but it was still much less expensive than a train or an aeroplane ticket to California. Oh my goodness, guess what we're going to do? Look at this picture. Look. The next day, Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop slid Stanley into his envelope along with the egg salad sandwich and the case full of milk and mailed him from the box on the corner. They've posted him. The envelope had to be folded to fit through the slot, but Stanley was a limber boy, and inside the box he straightened up again. Mrs. Lambchop was nervous because Stanley had never been away from home alone before. She rapped on the box. "Can you hear me, dear?" she called. "Are you all right?" Stanley's voice came quite clearly. "I'm fine. Can I eat my sandwich now?" "Wait an hour and try not to get overheated, dear," Mrs. Lambchop said. Then she and Mr. Lambchop cried out, "Goodbye, goodbye," and went home. Well, they left him in there. Stanley had a fine time in California. When the visit was over, the Jeffreys returned him in a beautiful white envelope they had made themselves. It had red and blue markings to show that it was airmail, and Thomas Jeffrey had lettered it up, "Valuable and fragile," and this end up on both sides. Back home, Stanley told his family that he had been handled so carefully he never felt a single bump. Mr. Lambchop said it proved that jet planes were wonderful, and so was the post office department, and that this was a great age in which to live. Stanley thought so too. Well, that's that chapter finished. Have a look at the envelope. There it is. Look, this end up. The Lambchop family, fragile, valuable. So that's the end of the chapter. Where would you like to be mailed if you could fit inside an envelope? Where would you go in the world? Oh, I'd love to know. Right, see you later. Take care.